The scream tore through the stillness of the night, a mother's raw, shattering wail that echoed off the jagged peaks of the Cascade Range. Jillian Gibbons stood frozen on the porch of their rented cabin, her hands trembling as the last sliver of sunlight vanished behind the mountains. Her husband, Torin Calder, and their 6-year-old daughter, Nia, had gone for a simple day hike along the Skyline Trail, promising to be back by dusk. That was 17 hours ago. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, but no trace of their laughter, no rustle of their boots on the path. Jillian's knees buckled as she clutched the faded photo of Torin hoisting Nia onto his shoulders, her tiny hands gripping his jacket, both beaming with the joy of the wild. Now that joy was a ghost, swallowed by the towering trees. She dialed 911 with shaking fingers, her voice breaking as she begged for help. The dispatcher's calm tone did little to ease the icy dread pooling in her chest. Torin was no novice. He'd mapped every ridge, packed extra food, and carried a whistle for emergencies. Nia, with her bright eyes and endless questions, had trusted him completely. Yet, as the hours stretched into a suffocating silence, Jillian knew something had gone horribly wrong. Ranger Lyle Grayson arrived at the trailhead just after midnight, his weathered face etched with the weight of too many searches. The Cascade Range was no stranger to vanishings. Its dense forests and steep drops had claimed hikers before, but a father and daughter, experienced and prepared, vanishing without a whisper was a puzzle that gnawed at him. He rallied a team of volunteers, their headlamps cutting through the dark like frail beacons. The search began with the last known coordinates from Torin's GPS, a narrow path winding through moss-draped firs and rocky outcrops. The air was thick with the hum of insects and the distant howl of a coyote, but no human sound broke the night. Lyle's boots crunched over fallen branches as he scanned for any sign, a snapped twig, a footprint, anything. The team fanned out, calling Torin's name, their voices swallowed by the vastness. By dawn, exhaustion set in, but the lack of clues only fueled their determination. Jillian waited at the base camp, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching Nia's favorite pink scarf like a lifeline. Every rustle in the bushes made her heart leap, only to crash when it was just a deer or a shifting shadow. As the sun climbed higher, the search grew desperate. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors chopping the mist while ground teams battled steep inclines and hidden ravines. Torin's expertise haunted Lyle. How could a man who read the wilderness like a book simply disappear? Nia's small frame, reliant on her father, added a layer of urgency. The team found a discarded water bottle near a creek, its label worn but recognizable as Torin's brand. Hope flared briefly, but it led to nothing more. Days turned to weeks, and the official search scaled back, leaving Jillian and a handful of volunteers to comb the trails. The community rallied, plastering posters of Torin and Nia's smiling faces across towns. But the mountains held their silence. Jillian's nights were filled with nightmares, Nia's giggle cut short, Torin's strong hands reaching for help. 17 months passed, a relentless stretch of grief and unanswered questions, until a hiker's call shattered the quiet. It was a crisp October morning in 2005 when Jared Holt, an amateur photographer, ventured off the main trail, his camera slung around his neck. The fog hung low, cloaking the forest in an eerie gray veil. He paused to adjust his lens, his eyes catching a flash of color against the muted greens. There, draped over a mossy branch high on a cliffside, were clothes, a blue jacket, a pink scarf, and a small backpack, swaying gently in the breeze. His breath caught as he zoomed in, the fabric tattered but unmistakable. He scrambled down the ridge, heart pounding, and marked the spot with a flare. When Lyle arrived, his seasoned gaze narrowed on the find. The jacket matched Torin's description, the scarf was Nia's, and the backpack bore a child's sticker of a cartoon owl, Nia's favorite. The items were hung deliberately, as if placed there, not tossed by wind or wildlife. Lyle's mind raced. Had they survived this long, only to leave a signal? Or was this a cruel taunt from the wilderness? He called for a forensic team, his voice tight with a mix of hope and dread. Jillian, summoned to the site, collapsed at the sight, her sobs mingling with the wind. The mystery deepened, and the search for answers reignited with a burning intensity. The forest seemed to watch as investigators swarmed the area, their gloved hands carefully bagging the evidence. The clothes were damp, weathered by months of rain and sun, but the backpack held a clue, a crumpled map with a faint X marked near a remote ridge. Lyle studied it under a portable light, his fingers tracing the lines. Torin had deviated from the trail, perhaps seeking shelter or water. The team set out again, following the map's hint, their boots sinking into the soft earth. Jillian trailed behind, her resolve hardened by the sight of Nia's scarf. The ridge was treacherous, a sheer drop on one side, its edge lined with gnarled roots. As they climbed, a faint scent of smoke drifted through the trees. Old, faint, but real. Lyle signaled a halt, his instincts kicking in. Could Torin have built a fire? The possibility hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope. The team pressed on, the mystery of the hung clothes and bag driving them deeper into the unknown. What had happened to Torin and Nia in those 17 months? The answer lay hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The ridge loomed like a scar across the mountain's face, its jagged spine cloaked in a tangle of ferns and stunted pines that clawed at the sky. Lyle Grayson led the way, his machete hacking through the underbrush with rhythmic swings, each one echoing the pounding in his chest. The map from the backpack burned in his pocket. A crude sketch, ink smudged, but the X bold, pointing to this forsaken spur 5 miles off the Skyline Trail. Jillian Calder followed close, her breath ragged, the pink scarf now tucked into her waistband like a talisman. She'd insisted on coming, her eyes hollow but fierce, whispering to herself that every step brought her closer to Nia. The team, 6 strong, including 2 K9 handlers and a medic, moved in a tight line, their radios crackling with static updates from the command post. The scent of old smoke grew stronger, a faint char that teased the nostrils, hinting at a fire long cold. Lyle's gut twisted. In the Cascades, smoke could mean salvation or a trap, wildfire scars or something deliberate. They crested the ridge by midday, the sun slicing through the canopy in harsh shafts that illuminated swirling dust motes. Below stretched a narrow bowl, a natural amphitheater ringed by sheer granite walls pocked with fissures. Vines draped the rocks like veils, and at the center lay a creek bed, dry now but scored with the fury of spring melts. The dogs whined, noses to the ground, pulling their handlers toward a cluster of boulders near the far wall. Lyle signaled a halt, his hand raised against the glare. "Fan out slow," he murmured into his radio. Eyes sharp, no rushing. Jillian's face paled as she spotted it first. A makeshift lean-to, pieced from snapped branches and a torn tarp, sagging against an overhang. It was crude, survivalist work, the kind Torin would know from his backcountry courses, but as they approached, the air turned sour, decay, sharp and metallic, undercut by the earthy rot of wet leaves. The medic, a wiry woman named Kira Voss, no relation to the family, but the name made Jillian flinch, knelt first, her gloves snapping on. She parted the tarp with care, revealing a hollow scraped into the dirt floor. Inside, curled in a fetal position, lay the remains of a man. Skeletal, clad in tattered jeans and a shredded thermal shirt, his skull tilted as if in sleep, one arm extended toward the entrance. No sign of violence, just the quiet surrender of exposure. Kira's voice was steady over the radio. Adult male, mid-30s. Hypothermia likely, based on position, time of death, months ago. Lyle's jaw tightened. Dental records would confirm it, but the build, the faded tattoo on the exposed forearm, a compass rose, Torin's mark, left no doubt. Jillian let out a keening sound, muffled by her sleeve as she sank to her knees. "Torin?" she gasped, reaching out before Kira gently pulled her back. The bowl felt smaller now, the walls pressing in, as if the mountain itself mourned. But Nia? The child's absence clawed at them all. The team scoured the lean-to, sifting through debris with trowels and brushes. Amid the pine needles and ash, they unearthed fragments, a broken watch, its face frozen at 4:17 p.m., dusk on the day they vanished, a half-eaten energy bar wrapper, Nia's favorite peanut butter flavor, and then, glinting in the dirt, a small silver locket, its chain snapped. Inside, a tiny photo of Jillian, smiling. Torin's, no doubt, a gift from their wedding. Lyle pocketed it, his mind racing. The hung clothes, deliberate, elevated, suggested a signal, a plea for rescue. But why here, off-trail, in this hidden pocket? The map's X aligned perfectly, as if Torin had marked his prison. Kira examined the bones closer under a portable UV light, her face grim. "Fractures here," she said, pointing to the ribcage and femur. "Old breaks, healed wrong. He was hurt bad. Fall, maybe. Dragged himself this far." The pieces fit a grim puzzle. Injury on the ridge, crawl to shelter, a desperate fire to ward off the chill. But a 6-year-old? How long could she have lasted? As the team documented the site, the dogs grew frantic, baying toward a thicket of salal bushes at the bowl's edge. One handler, a grizzled veteran named Marcos, followed, Jillian trailing like a shadow. The undergrowth parted to reveal a shallow depression, a child's grave scraped from the loam marked by a cairn of river stones. No body, just a hollow rain-eroded with wildflowers pushing through. Jillian's hand flew to her mouth, a sob escaping. "No," she whispered. "Not my girl." Marcos knelt, probing the soil. "Disturbed recently," he muttered. "Animals or—" He trailed off, eyes flicking to Lyle. Scavengers could unearth a shallow burial, scatter remains, but no bones, no fabric scraps, just emptiness. The air hummed with unspoken fears. Cougars prowled these slopes. Black bears raided camps. Had Nia survived her father, only to fall prey? Or escaped, wandering deeper into the wild? Lyle radioed for forensics, his voice clipped. "We need ground-penetrating radar, and call in the feds. This isn't just a hiker anymore." Word spread like wildfire through the volunteer network, drawing more hands to the ridge. By evening, the bowl swarmed with experts, anthropologists from the state lab tracking the bone weathering to late fall 2004, botanists noting the fire's remnants, charred cones from September's crop, aligning with the timeline. Jillian refused to leave, pitching a tent nearby, her vigil a silent accusation against the indifferent peaks. Lyle sat with her under the stars, the locket in his palm. "He fought for her," he said softly. "That X on the map, it was for you. A way to find her." But doubt gnawed. The hung clothes mocked them now, a riddle without an answer. Why elevate them? To dry? To signal from afar? Or something darker? A ritual? A farewell? Sleep evaded them, the creek bed whispering secrets in the wind. Dawn broke gray and relentless, the team expanding grids outward from the bowl. Helicopters thumped overhead, their spotlights sweeping like accusatory fingers, but the dense canopy mocked them, swallowing light and sound alike. Ground teams rappelled into fissures, their ropes humming against granite, searching for hidden crevices where a child might hide, or be hidden. Jillian joined a sweep along the creek, her calls for Nia echoing off the walls, answered only by ravens. Midway through the morning, a shout cut the air. Marcos again, his dog digging furiously at a root ball near the ridge drop-off. They converged, hearts hammering. The earth yielded a small object, a child-sized boot, pink laces frayed, sole caked in red clay unique to the lower valleys. Nia's from the photos. But alone, no match. It pointed south, downstream, as if carried by water or foot. Lyle traced the terrain map, his finger sliding along a faint game trail. "Flash flood could have swept her," he said. "Or she walked. Kids do that, follow streams." Jillian's eyes lit with fragile fire. "Then we follow too." The boot became their beacon, redirecting efforts to the ravine below. Ropes and harnesses deployed, teams descending into the gorge where the creek roared anew after overnight rain. Vines snagged gear, rocks shifted underfoot, but they pressed on, the mystery fueling them. Was Nia out there, changed by the wild, her father's signal her only legacy? Or had the mountain taken her fully, leaving echoes in the trees? The questions hung heavier than the mist, pulling them deeper into the green abyss. The ravine clawed downward like a wound in the earth, its walls slick with moss and veined by roots that twisted like desperate fingers. Lyle Grayson clipped into his harness, the rope taut against his harness as he rappelled into the gloom, the creek's roar drowning out Jillian's faint calls from above. Rain from the night before had swollen the water to a churning brown serpent, flecked with foam and debris, logs tumbling like forgotten toys, branches snagging on boulders with splintering cracks. The pink boot in his pack felt like lead, its clay sole a breadcrumb leading them into this maw. Marcos and Kira flanked him, their lights cutting yellow swaths through the spray, while two more team members held the line's topside. "Stay sharp," Lyle barked over the din. Flash floods hit hard here. 2004's melt-off washed out half the trails east of here. Jillian peered over the lip, her face a mask of resolve. The scarf knotted around her neck as if it could summon Nia from the depths. They hit bottom after a bone-jarring drop, boots splashing into ankle-deep current that tugged like a living thing. The gorge narrowed fast, walls towering 30 feet, choked with devil's club thorns that snagged sleeves and drew blood. The dog whined, nose to the silt, pulling Marcos upstream against the flow. Lyle followed, eyes scanning for color, a scrap of pink, a glint of silver. The boot's clay matched the banks here, eroded red from iron-rich soil higher up, carried down by some violent surge. He flashed back to the old reports. That brutal January '05 flood, when Cascade's snowpack melted under relentless rain, turning creeks to killers. Entire campsites vanished overnight. Hikers swept miles downstream, their gear snagged in treetops like macabre flags. Was that Nia's fate? Torin's signal clothes hung high for the same reason. Flood debris, elevated by receding waters. But the placement felt too neat, too deliberate. An hour in, the dog froze, hackles up, pawing at an undercut bank where the creek undercut a massive cedar. Marcos yanked back, cursing as the soil gave way in a cascade of mud. Easy, could be unstable. They dug careful, trowels biting soft earth, unearthing roots and pebbles. Then a glint, a child-sized buckle, rusted but intact, from a sandal strap. Nia's, from the missing persons file, blue with starfish charms. Jillian's voice cracked over the radio from above. "Is it her? Lyle, talk to me." He swallowed hard, bagging it. "Another piece. We're close." But close to what? Hope or the end? The team pushed on, the gorge twisting into a slot canyon, sunlight a distant memory. Kira's light caught something higher, a flash of white wedged in branches 15 feet up, where floodwaters would peak. They scrambled for footing, ropes biting palms, and hauled up. A scrap of fabric, cotton from a shirt, embroidered with a faded unicorn. Nia's pajamas, the ones she'd worn that morning in '04. Jillian's descent was frantic, harness fumbling as she dropped in, splashing to them with wild eyes. She snatched the fabric, pressing it to her face, inhaling the faint must of earth and memory. "My baby," she whispered, tears carving tracks in the grime on her cheeks. Lyle steadied her, his own throat tight. "This means she came through here, alive, after Torin." The unicorn patch aligned with the timeline, worn but not shredded, suggesting weeks, not months, in the elements. But the gorge forked ahead, one arm plunging deeper into untouched wild, the other veering toward old logging roads, faint paths from the '80s clear-cuts. Which way? The dog circled the fork, confused, while Marcos checked his GPS, signal spotty, but pings suggested human activity faint to the east, decades old but stirring now with renewed searches. Back at base by dusk, the finds laid out on a tarp like relics, boot, buckle, patch. Forensics rushed in from Seattle, A lab tech named Reese Harlan, sharp-eyed, no-nonsense, squinting under lamps. Textiles show water damage consistent with submersion, then air drying high, he said, peering through a scope. Microbes in the fibers match Cascade Creek beds, post-flood exposure. No animal chew. Protected, maybe. Protected how? Lyle paced, mind churning. Torin injured, shelters Nia, hangs clothes as a marker before succumbing. Flood hits months later, sweeps her downstream, gear snagging along the way. But 17 months? A child alone that long defied odds. Bears, exposure, starvation. Jillian hovered, tracing the unicorn's horn. She was tough. Like her dad, taught her to follow water, find berries. Reese nodded, pulling a soil sample. Clay's from upstream near your ridge, but this pollen, alder bloom, early spring '05. She moved after winter. The revelation hung heavy. Nia survived the flood, wandered east. Harlan's team ran isotopes on the buckle's corrosion, water signature from a spring near the old roads where loggers once camped. Not wild anymore, he said. Hints of metal, oil, human touch. Lyle's pulse quickened. Poachers? Squatters? The Cascades hid hermits, off-grid folk scraping by on mushrooms and weed in '04 before busts cleaned house. Jillian's eyes sharpened. Someone helped her? Or took her? Whispers in town forums. Sightings of a feral girl in '05 dismissed as coyote pups. Lyle radioed volunteers, redirect to the roads, door-to-doors in ghost hamlets. Night fell, stars pricking the sky like accusations. Jillian sat vigil, stitching the patch to the scarf. She's out there, Lyle. I feel it. As teams mobilized at dawn, a crackle on the scanner. A hunter's call from the East Fork, spotting a carved tree, initials NC/crude, with an arrow pointing down a faint track. Calder. Hope flickered, fragile as a match in wind. They geared up, plunging back in, the mystery coiling tighter. What weighted down that arrow? Salvation or the mountain's final jest? The carved tree stood sentinel at the fork, its bark scarred by a child's desperate blade, NC, slashed deep, arrow jabbing east like a bony finger toward the logging roads. Lyle Grayson traced the grooves with gloved fingers, the wood still pale beneath the moss, fresh enough to suggest spring carving, maybe March '05 when snowmelt swelled the creeks. Jillian Calder pressed close, her breath hitching as she recognized the tilt of the letters, Nia's wobbly print from kindergarten drawings. She marked her way, Jillian murmured, voice raw. My smart girl. The team buzzed around it, cameras flashing, plaster casts hardening in the damp soil. Marcos's dog sniffed the base, tail low, then bolted down the arrow's path, baying into the understory. Lyle radioed the post. Confirmed sign, heading east, old cuts. Volunteers scrambled to join, jeeps rumbling up rutted tracks that hadn't seen maintenance since the '90s mill closures. The Cascade's east flank unfolded in waves of second-growth fir and alder thickets, remnants of clear cuts now reclaimed by brambles that clawed at shins and snagged packs. Jillian matched their pace, the unicorn patch sewn to her sleeve fluttering like a flag of defiance. 2 miles in, the trail frayed into a ghost path, overgrown but trodden faint. Deer, maybe, or something smaller, lighter. The air shifted, carrying a whiff of wood smoke, acrid and recent mingled with the tang of damp ferns. Kira Gibbons halted, ear cocked. Hear that? A rustle, not wind. Fabric on branch, soft and rhythmic. They crested a low rise, boots silent on needle duff, and froze. There, in a sun-dappled clearing ringed by stump sentinels, stood a shack of lashed poles and corrugated tin, sagging against a nurse log like a forgotten trap. Smoke curled lazy from a stone-ringed fire pit, where a pot simmered over embers. Chickens scratched in a wire pen, their clucks punctuating the hush. Lyle's hand drifted to his sidearm, signaling quiet. Not abandoned, he whispered. The door, a slab of plywood, creaked open, and a figure emerged. A woman, mid-40s, wiry as rootstock, her gray-streaked hair pulled back under a frayed bandana. She hefted an axe, eyes narrowing at the intruders, but no fear, just wariness honed by years off-grid. "Who are you?" she called, voice gravelly, axe loose in her grip. Lyle stepped forward, palms out. "Ranger Grayson, USFS. Looking for a missing girl. 6 years old, dark hair, last seen October '04. The woman's face didn't crack, but her knuckles whitened on the handle. Jillian pushed past, eyes scanning the clearing. "Nia? Baby, it's Mommy." No answer, just the chickens scattering. The woman lowered the axe a fraction. "Ain't no girl here, just me in the woods." But her gaze flicked to the shack, a tell as sharp as the arrow. Marcos circled wide, dog at heel, while Kira flanked the pen. A glint caught Lyle's eye. Pink, dangling from a line strung between trees. Nia's missing sweater, mended with coarse thread, drying beside a pair of too small overalls. Jillian lunged for it, clutching the wool to her chest. "This is hers, where is she?" The woman, Dara Klein, as her faded permit later revealed, sighed, shoulders slumping like a felled tree. She wasn't a poacher, not quite. A herbalist, scraping by on ginseng roots and morel sales in the gray markets of '04 before the busts hit hard. Divorced, childless, she'd fled Seattle's grind for this patch after a mill layoff, building the shack with scavenged tin and stubborn will. That January, post-flood, she'd been foraging upslope when the creek spat up wreckage. The boot, the buckle, tumbling in foam-choked rapids that had carved new channels overnight. 5 inches in hours, they learned later. '05's monster melt, snowpack bursting under freak thaw, washing out bridges and trails from Snoqualmie to Stevens Pass. Dara followed the debris upstream, axe ready for bears, and found her. A wisp of a girl, 7 now by reckoning, curled in a root hollow, cheeks hollowed, eyes wild as a fawn's. Nia, feverish, clutching the locket like a talisman, whispering, "Daddy said follow water," between shivers. Dara had nursed her back, berries, broth from snares, stories by firelight to chase the nightmares. No calls to rangers. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with warrants for old trespasses. Nia bloomed slow, learning to snare rabbits, name the mushrooms, but the wild clung to her, flinching at loud voices, vanishing into thickets at strangers' scents. Jillian's plea cracked something in Dara. "She's inside," she said finally, voice thick. "Sleepin'. Don't spook her." The door swung wide and there she was. Nia Calder, perched on a pallet of hides, whittling a stick with a penknife, her frame gaunt but whole, dark curls tamed by a leather cord. She looked up, eyes wide, curious, not recognizing, then froze at Jillian's sob. "Mama." The word hung fragile, a bridge across 17 months of silence. Lyle radioed for medics, his throat tight. "We got her, alive." The shack filled with soft questions, Dara hovering like a sentinel as Jillian knelt, arms open, the sweater bridging the gap. Outside, the chickens clucked on, the flood-scarred creek murmuring below, a testament to the mountain's mercy, cruel and kind in equal measure. But questions lingered in the clearing's hush. How had Nia carved that tree, alone after Torin? What scars hid beneath her quiet gaze? Dara's story rang true. Herbs for fever, snares for protein. But the feds would dig, warrants or no. Jillian held her daughter, breathing in the scent of pine and earth, tears soaking the mended wool. "I never stopped," she whispered. Nia nodded, small hand in hers. "Daddy said you'd come." The team stood guard as dusk pooled, the arrow's path closing a circle etched in loss and unlikely grace. Yet the cascades whispered warnings. Floods reshape, secrets erode. What else had the waters carried away? The shack's dim interior smelled of damp wood and chamomile tea, a fragile sanctuary pieced from salvaged dreams. Nia Calder sat cross-legged on the hide pallet, her small fingers pausing mid-whittle on the stick, eyes locking onto Jillian's like a deer sensing the hunter's shadow. 7 years old now, but the wild had etched lines on her face, sun-freckled cheeks hollowed by lean winters, curls matted with burrs and the faint scent of creek water. She wore Dara's hand-me-down flannel, too big at the cuffs, but the locket dangled at her neck, silver catching the firelight. "Mama?" Nia whispered again, the word tentative, testing the air like a toe in cold stream. Jillian knelt slow, arms aching to crush her close but holding back, afraid one wrong move would spook the fawn back into the thicket. "Yes, baby, it's me. I found you." Tears carved clean paths down Jillian's dirt-streaked face as Nia leaned in, hesitant then collapsed into her, small body shuddering with silent sobs that echoed the gorge's roar. Outside, Lyle Grayson kept watch with Marcos and Kira, the clearing bathed in the soft bruise of twilight. Chickens settled in their pen oblivious to the unraveling miracle. Dara Klein leaned against the shack wall, arms crossed, her axe within reach but idle. "She don't talk much about before," Dara said low, voice rough as gravel. "Nightmares, though, screaming for daddy, water rising like monsters." Lyle nodded, piecing it with the forensics. The 05 flood, that brutal January deluge when Cascade's snowpack burst under freak rains, dumping 5 inches in hours across southwest ridges. Torin, weakened in his bowl shelter, had etched that final map X, hung the clothes high as a flood signal, gear snagged in treetops, a silent SOS for planes or eyes sharp enough. Nia, orphaned by his last breath, followed his teachings: water downstream, berries for belly, carve your trail. She clawed through the undercut, fever raging, until the torrent claimed her boot and buckle but spat her into Dara's path. Medics arrived by chopper at dawn, blades thumping like a heartbeat revived. Nia clung to Jillian, flinching at the lights, but let the paramedic check her vitals. Malnourished, but no breaks. Heart steady as a snare drum. Dara handed over a tin of dried morels and a journal, pages filled with Nia's crude drawings, stick figures by fire, floods as blue scribbles swallowing trees. "Kept her fed on roots and rabbits," Dara muttered. "Figured the law'd take her anyway, me with my warrants for digging ginseng off-season. The feds would sort it, child endangerment charges, but Jillian's plea cut through. She saved my girl. That's all I see." Lyle watched the helo lift off, Nia waving from Jillian's lap, the pink sweater bundled around them like armor. Back in town, the story rippled, front pages calling it the Cascades miracle, volunteers toasting with coffee at the trailhead. But Jillian knew the scars ran deep. Therapy for Nia's wild eyes, nightmares of water and loss. Torin's compass rose tattoo, inked on his arm, now a pendant Jillian wore, turning in the wind like a promise kept. The mountains gave back what they took grudgingly in floods and hung clothes and unlikely hermits. Nia whispered one night, tucked in a real bed. "Daddy said the trees talk. They told me to wait." Jillian held her, the ache easing to a quiet glow. 17 months of silence broken, a family stitched from ravels. The Cascades loomed eternal, secrets traded for survival, their peaks etched with one more tale of what hides in the green heart.